Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to thank the organizers for accepting my paper for this workshop. In my 5 minutes note, I will give a short comment on the issue of violent mothers in ancient Egypt. Since this topic is hard to tackle archaeologically, my primary sources for now are texts and images from ancient Egypt. Evolutionary biology claims that maternal aggression is a trademark of new mothers common to all mammals. It is a response to an actual environmental threat. However, although violence is common to all humans, it is always culturally mediated in one way or another. My goal in this paper is to explore how maternal aggression was mediated in ancient Egypt. My first example comes from 5th dynasty tomb of high official Inti from the Shesha. One scene in this tomb depicts Egyptian soldiers storming a Syro-Palestinian fortress. Outside, Egyptian soldiers combat enemy soldiers who are depicted as passive losers receiving damage from Egyptians. Inside, enemy women and children take action against Egyptian soldiers who storm the fortress. The scene presents us with a binary opposition between weak enemy men outside and offensive enemy women inside. The underlying message is that the enemies are so weak that their women have to defend them. However, from a point of view of matricentric feminism, these are not any women, but most probably mothers, since children are depicted with them. The battle scene from the tomb of Inti uses the defensive violence of Syro-Palestinian mothers for a very specific ideological purpose, that of representing enemy men as weak. My second example is a textual source, Karnak stela of King Ahmose, founder of 18th dynasty. It informs us, among else, about the important role of his mother Ahotep in the war against the Hyksos kings. The mother of the king is described as the one who takes care of Egypt, recruits its infantry, Menefit, secures it, takes care of refugees, Wetehu, gathers the deserters, Teshu, calms Upper Egypt, and draws out the rebels, Betenu. If the woman known in Egyptology as Ahotep I is indeed the mother of Ahmose, then one should mention that she was buried with weaponry which was most likely ceremonial. It should not be taken as evidence of her actual participation in war and battles, not because women cannot do it, but because weapons in graves, no matter who was buried with them, are not evidence for fighting activities per se. Signs of battle-induced trauma or signs of occupational stress which could be connected to fighting are lacking in the case of Ahotep I. Coming back to the stela, the fact that the Queen Ahotep is described in connection to war raises the question of when is female violence legitimized in ancient Egypt. This question bothered ancient Egyptian men themselves, since King Amenemhat I of the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom also asked in Papyrus Millingen 2.7 from the New Kingdom, have women ever led armies? Some of them are depicted in violent acts, such as the famous smiting of the enemy scene. I already discussed elsewhere that these images should not be interpreted as the sign of equal status to men. The main reason for this is that when wives of the pharaohs are depicted smiting or trampling, the victims are female. These examples are not directly related to the motif of violent mothers. However, in the scene of a Nile flotilla with Akhenaten and Nefertiti in the bark smiting enemies, known from Talatat relief blocks from Hermopolis, their daughters are depicted accompanying them. This challenges our modern notion of parental advisory. Even if the scene is most closely related to royal ideology, the fact is that children are part of it, observing their violent mother. My last examples provide the interpretative background. A number of ancient Egyptian goddesses with maternal attributes take violent actions in order to protect their children who are by rule male. Isis is represented in the context of Horus and Set in the text of Papyrus Chester BT1 from the 20th dynasty as shifting roles. She is at first a cunning widow who uses magic to trick Set in confessing that he is not the legitimate heir to the throne of her husband Osiris, whom he killed. In her attempt to help her son Horus, Isis also turns to violence during the battle of Horus and Set in the form of hippopotami. She casts a harpoon into the water and hits Horus, who cries out to her that he is her son. Because of this, she calls it back and casts it again, this time hitting Set. However, Set also complains and cries out that he is her brother. Realizing this, she calls the harpoon back. Clearly, violence of the mother to her child is not legitimized, but neither is the violence of the sister to her brother. This strong patriarchal customary law puts Isis in a position in which she can only assist her son with wisdom, magic, and trickery. Last but not the least, the goddess Mut, wife of Amun and mother of Khonsu, whose name is also the ancient Egyptian word for mother, also has aggressive aspects. Since aggression and violence was considered to be a masculine feature, it is not surprising that she is often depicted with a phallus attached to her body. She states that her fiery blast is against his enemies, enemies of the king, as on the second pilo of Medinet Habu temple of Ramses III. The violence of Mut is legitimized because she is protecting the king. In conclusion, the motif of the violent mother in ancient Egypt can have different meanings in different contexts, from a ridiculous element serving to diminish the strength and masculinity of enemies to an expected action in service of kingship. Violent mothers serve the patriarchal ideology one way or another. Thank you for your attention.